Welcome back. I'm Gary Parr.
And I'm Vanna Pfeiffer.
And our guest this week for the third time, Gayanne Rogers. Hi, Gayanne.
Hi, Gary. Hi, Vanna.
Hi.
Glad to have you with us. Wow. Been a while.
Glad to be back.
Yeah, it's been like a year plus, I think.
It has been a while. The time goes by so fast. You know, we only have X number of months till the end of 2019. I'm still back in Y2K waiting for the computer problems.
Okay, well... Okay, well, you just keep waiting then, Gayanne. It'll come around.
I
am. And this week we are sponsored by Sassy Jack's Stitchery. And here is a word from Kim and the good folks at Sassy Jack's.
This edition of Fiber Talk is proudly sponsored by Sassy Jack's Stitchery. Sassy Jack's is a vibrant young needlework shop located on the picturesque main street of Weaverville, North Carolina, happily situated between Five Little Monkeys Quilt Shop and nationally recognized Well-Bred Bakery. We are nestled in a valley of the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina, just minutes north of Asheville, and a short 20-minute drive from the Biltmore Estate, one of America's national treasures. Sassy Jack's Stitchery is proud to be a brick-and-mortar needlework shop, featuring cross-stitch, counted needlepoint, embroidery, and punch needle. We host a wonderful collection of fine antique needlework samplers on display, many of which have charted patterns available for purchase. We frequently rotate our collection, so every visit is likely to yield a new treasure for you to enjoy. We are moving into our fall and winter season of stitching at Sassy Jack's, and we invite you to join us in one of the many opportunities we've created for you to stitch along and learn. We have a return of our tree decorating event, wherein everyone who sends us a newly stitched ornament for our tree by December 24th will receive a coupon for 15% off any single purchase during January and February. This year will also mark our third year doing our special Valentine's Day small exchange. We've opened our designer selection to include Summer House Stitchworks and Jeanette Douglas designs, in addition to Plum Street samplers. You may stitch any small design from any of these designers using a pattern and supplies from your stash or purchasing something new from us at Sassy Jack's. Finish it into a needlework small and send it to us before January 25th. We will exchange it from another in the group and send you a beautiful gift from your stitching sister just in time for Valentine's Day. Check out our website or upcoming newsletters for more details and finishing tips for these fun winter traditions at Sassy Jack's. We hope you find a way to visit us soon. If you can't make it to us, we hope you visit us online at Facebook, Instagram, SassyJackStitchery.com, and our new FlossTube channel, Yonder Ways. We love it when you stop by and say hi, whether it's in person or online. We truly appreciate you, and we really appreciate all we hear and learn from Fiber Talk. We are super proud to be a sponsor of this wonderful resource for stitching goodness. Thank you, Fiber Talk, for giving us some stabby pokey talk twice a week. Kim and team at Sassy Jack's Stitchery.
Thanks, Kim, and thanks for sponsoring us on an ongoing basis. Really appreciate the support. Helps us keep this thing going. Okay, now I want to get the business out of the way first. So you do, as we all know, you do a sale, once or twice a year?
Yeah, it's maximum 3 times a year.
Okay.
And that's because I like to stitch as much as everybody else does. And if I sold all the time, all I do is be in mail jail 24/7. So why do that? So
Exactly.
I sell, and my big sale's coming up in October. And it's in mid-October. And if anybody wants to know, the easiest thing to do is to go to my website and sign up for my newsletter. There, how do you like that for promo?
Yep. October 17, 8 a.m. California time, 11 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, 10 o'clock Central time, 9 o'clock Mountain time. That's all your time zones right there.
That's good. Yes, it happens.
Yeah.
And I even get Aussies staying up all night from time to time. Anyway, I like my little business. I think it keeps my mind going, et cetera, et cetera. But I like to stitch more than anything else, and I need a lot of time to stitch. That's my happiest thing.
Some new designs, and then bringing back some old ones?
Yes, I have a series of new designs. I won't say what they are. They should be a surprise. And then I'm bringing back 3 of my big samplers that I used teaching pieces when I worked for the guilds back in the dark ages. And I thought I'd sell them. I got requests for them. And I try, if people request something, I add it to a list and look at who requests the most things. And then I bring that one back, or 2 of them back. And I bring back a couple of hearts it seems like every year, wedding hearts, bride and groom hearts. And it's just a general hodgepodge. And then on Saturday morning, I have a special feature called Surprise Windows, and it starts at 8 o'clock on the Saturday morning. And I open a window. It's sort of like Let's Make a Deal or whatever that program is, where they open things. And I open the window, and you can buy whatever's there if you want. And it's usually limited. Things in my sale are general sale are relatively unlimited. And then if you come to the surprise windows, some of the things are very limited. And one of my best features is that my group, like Antique Needlework Tools, and Carolyn Meacham, who's a really wonderful dealer, has a window, and she supplies these knockout needlework tools. So there's always a scramble for them.
There you go.
Stilettos are a big deal among modern stitchers because they're alternative laying tools, and they're so beautiful. So the stitchers I know all grab stilettos from the old days, which are made to poke holes, and use them as laying tools. They're wonderful. They're beautiful.
There you go, Vonna.
So
October 17th.
It's just October.
No,
17th.
October 19th. It's October 17th. My sale
Thursday the 17th. Got to fix that.
That's when it opens. But this special feature is on Saturday morning, the 19th.
Okay.
And it just lasts a couple hours.
Is it live?
What I do is I sit on my end of the computer, and I publish the hyperlink, and then you can go see what's behind the window.
Oh.
And then you can buy whatever you want. There's a big scramble. And I try and mix it with things that are limited and unlimited. But I usually, Carolyn is a friend of mine. I've been an old needlework tool collector for a long time. And she came aboard years ago, and she just started doing 8 or 10 different needlework tools. And and gradually people just got on to how beautiful they were. So it was fun. I don't mean this to be just a total advertisement.
Well, I don't know, but this is not good for me to know.
Oh, you should come see them.
No,
they don't last.
It's not good for her. It's good for you, Gayanne, because she has no self-control whatsoever. So.
Oh, hey, Bonnie, you and I are going to get along just fine.
Yeah. There's willpower in the dictionary. You will not see Vanna's picture. No, not there.
How many stitchers are there who really love stitching who have a lot of willpower?
Probably not very many.
I don't know any.
Does that, what we're going to talk about, will that make me a world-class stitcher that I have zero? Is that part of the things to tick off as if you have zero willpower? And if you saw I always sit on an ottoman in my bedroom whenever we do podcasts. And I opened up it's like one of those storage ottomans, and I opened it up, and if you could see all what's in there, I'm ashamed of myself. I have got to go through it.
Would it help you to know that I just bought, there's a vintage bead I like, and there was a dealer who came around and offered me them, and I bought 10 gross of them. One bead.
Oh.
Yeah, see,
and I went
selling them.
In my height of something, I went into a store and bought 110,000 vintage sequins. So I don't know, I just don't know very many stitchers who don't like to do that.
Yeah.
It seems a part of stitching. It seems an important part of stitching, actually. When you think about it, it's visual stimulation, a lot of it. And that does go into making a world-class stitcher.
Absolutely.
Being aware of learning to look at your surroundings, I think, is a really important ingredient in this. And so if you surround yourself with things that are worth looking at, that inspire you, of course it's going to help. If you just sit and stare, Gary, is most of your audience painted canvas people?
No.
Or do you know?
No.
Are they counted? Are they cross-stitch people?
It's a pretty good mix. Counted, cross-stitch. Yeah, it's a mix across the board because, yeah.
Okay, whatever you're looking at, you go to the store and you decide you want something that's new. You go to Sassy Jack's, you order something from them. They think it's wonderful, you think it's wonderful, and you sit and look at it, right? You should look at it for a very long time before you start doing anything on it. And then you should look at things that are allied to it so that you see different ways that people handle this subject matter, maybe the colors on it, maybe you've got a stitch guide with it. Look at the different options you have and spend a lot of time looking at it before you actually start so that you see various things. And in time, if you do this, you learn to see in different ways. I have a really, really wonderful illustration of this. Do you know, I'm a great fan of the architect Frank Gehry.
Mm-hmm.
And I was listening to an interview with him one time, and I don't think there's a bone in his body that's not artistic. I think what he can do with line is just unbelievable. The interviewer said to him, well, where do you find your inspiration? And he looked around and he said, it's everywhere. Just look around. And he happened to look down in a wastebasket, and there were some papers furled in there. And he said, God, look what's going on down there. Look at that really wonderful line in there. And the only way you ever learn to do that is just by opening your eyes and looking and thinking about it.
See, that's one of the best pieces of advice I got when I was learning photography. Is a veteran. Yeah. A veteran told me, when you come up to a scene, particularly if you're on vacation and you're trying to catch the tourist shots to show in the slideshow when you get home, or these days on your iPad, whatever. He said, walk up to it and immediately take the 2 or 3 standard tourist shots or standard shots that you have to take because of the scene, because those are the ones that you want to show everybody. We were here, we saw this, it was wonderful. And then he said just the same thing as you. Then just stop and just let yourself immerse into the scene. And then as you do that, the real photos will pop out.
Right.
The craggy rock over here that has an interesting shape, or this cluster of flowers, or any number of things. Those are the real photos that will pop out. And that's when you start doing the serious photography. And so when you said that about just sitting and looking at a design and studying it for time, that immediately popped in my head that, yeah, and because you start to see what you might and might not do with it.
Exactly. And if you spend this time looking at it, you see things about the design. I mean, if you haven't hatched the design, if it's not your design, if it's somebody else's, I think you should spend some time trying to figure out what it is that the artist who drew it or stitched or, planned it or whatever, what did she or he intend to do with it? So that if there are a lot of curved lines, then you're not going to do something that's totally geometric in there, are you? Because it's going to fight with it. You want to play into the line of the design. That is such an important feature, and I don't see it a lot going on today, I'm sorry to say. If it's very hard and angle lines, then you want to follow that. Think of things. Look, see what the stitch guide says. Should you do this? Should you do that? What? Don't always take it right out of the gate. And I only have one rule that is ever a never. That I can think. The minute somebody says never to me, I can think of 100 ways that I would want to do it. I mean, it's just the contrarian part of me, but I have one never rule. Never stitch in colors you don't like. Mm-hmm. If you'll never do your wonderful work unless you just love the color. So if you've got a design and she has an acid green that you think, that's my worst nightmare color, except for Halloween, change it. Call Sassy Jacks and change it.
Yep.
I'm helping Sassy Jacks.
Yeah. Kim won't object. She'll be fine.
So, I think if you do what you have a passion for, I just finished a design I had an absolute passion for. I mourned how happy you are when you finish it? When I finished this, I went into mourning for 2 days. I missed it. I thought, when am I going to have another experience like this? I've got 100 things I should do. I loved every single stitch. I was doing my fantasy. And it just it was a wonderful period.
And then there's a vacuum afterwards, yeah.
Yeah, and then you think, well, what am I going to do now? And I love that. And I don't have another idea I love as much. That's why I made that one. And she just came out well. So it worked out very well. But you should take something that you want to do and think of, how can I make it the best I can make it? And it won't hurt even the most elementary stitcher, if you go Google basic design lessons, find a YouTube and watch a couple of them, just to find out about various ways of looking at things. It's back to what we were talking about earlier, about just taking some time and looking around you and learning to observe visual things around you that you like. What do I like? What don't I like?
Yeah.
Why? All right, that's part of world-class stitcher. But I don't think that's the part you were meaning. I think you were meaning the technical part, weren't you?
We were talking, we did a little sound test yesterday, and that became a conversation that now I wish I had recorded, but the topic came up. What is a world-class stitcher? And the question of whether is it a technical person, one who can execute precisely across a canvas or across a ground cloth? Is it an artist? What is a world-class stitcher? And I really enjoyed your insights into what makes that person, if that person exists.
That person does exist. Actually, I know a handful of them that I think are unbelievable needlewomen. And at the top of the list, if you've never seen anything of hers, unfortunately, I don't think there's much online, if anything, is a woman who taught for EGA for years and years named Audrey Francenia. I think she's not a counter person, she's a surface person, but she had the two things that make a world-class stitcher. First of all, she was an awesome technician. There wasn't anything that she made up her mind she wanted to do that she couldn't do, not like most of us who shy away from this or that because we think, oh, it's too much trouble. She could do anything, and with a beautiful hand at it. She had beautiful tension, but in addition, I don't know that it's more important, I think it's equally important. She had the eye of a real artist. She could tell when you should bring the line down another half an inch. So she combined those. Usually those two things don't fit together. Usually if you're a good technician, you're more rigid. If you're an artist, you're freer. And the artist can't be bothered sometimes with the discipline of technical expertise. Sometimes if the technical expertise person won't let go enough to be the artist. And every once in a while, in the people I'm thinking of, you find those two things unite. I just think it's an unusual combination, and there aren't very many. But it's nice to know they're there. That's what you don't have to be one of those people. But it's nice to know they're there and you look at their things. So the other one that comes to my mind is a retired teacher named Betty Chen Lee. I don't know if you've ever seen any of her work. No. And I wish I had permission to send you. But I got a conversation with somebody about overdyed threads, and they said, well, all she does is Scotch stitch with overdyed threads, said this woman to me. And I said, no overdyed thread in this. All that blending, and I mean, it's like every 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches, whatever needed, she's done just by picking this color of silk and starting it at where her eye tells her to start it. It's an awesome ability. And not very many people have it. She just had it in spades. And like Audrey, she was a wonderful technician, all bundled into one. But she was disciplined about what she did. Or they both are. I don't know. Audrey still stitches. I'm not sure Betty does. But both of these people taught for EGA forever.
So it's that's combinations when you can execute perfectly, but then you can see the art.
Got the vision.
Yeah.
So if you're somebody who's not drawing your own, if you take that time and look at what you're doing, and then you say, okay, I think I want to do this. I think I want to try that. I like the stitch guide's plan for this. I'm not so sure about that. And you experiment a bit carefully. If you're going to, as I say, nobody has to do this. It's just nice to know that there are people who choose to, because you can look up to them because they're so wonderful at this art form.
Well, it's, I look at you had me thinking way too much overnight about this very thing. And of course evaluating myself in terms of where do I fit on whatever continuum that is. And it's an interesting thought process because we all want to be good technical stitchers because that helps things look good. But then where where do you feel comfortable enough to branch away from that and into the artistic world? Or, do you have the skill? Do you have the vision? Or is it something you force yourself to do because you don't have the vision, but you just try?
If you have to force yourself to do it, the timing isn't right. There will come a time, or at least I've noticed this with most people, where they say, I really don't like that. Should I rip it out? Most people say, well, it's done, so I don't. But there comes a time in everybody's stitching life where they say, I really don't like the result I got with that. Rip it out and try something else. Don't do it on a big space. Don't do it on the whole canvas. Just start with a small area. As I say, if you don't like an acid green and the acid green becomes an important part of the design and you substitute something else, you're going to get positive results in one of two ways. Either you're going to say, I like this so much better. I like my choice so much better. Or you're going to say, now I understand why the designer used that. Mm-hmm. Both are good things to know. But you have to, I think you feel so much more passionate about your needlework if you bring something of yourself to it. So I, who design patterns as a job, this is what I like to think of myself as: somebody who provides you with a structure. And then I give you a stitch guide with every single stitch on the guide. And then I ask you, please don't do it exactly the way I did it. Bring a bit of yourself to it. It will mean more. So take a small part and fiddle with it a bit. If you don't like it, you can always rip it out and go back to what I did. But it will mean more to you if you develop a few of these skills. And the only way to do it is just by trying. And listening to go to YouTube. I wish I'd thought of this before and got a couple of YouTubes that are just basic design lessons, just talking about a focal point, building around the focal point, having a harmonious presentation. Find when I was talking about curvilinear things, find curvilinear stitching ability styles so that it all becomes harmonious in its presentation. Things like that are just elementary design 101. I don't know.
Well, it's this kind of plays into something that it's in my head and will always be in my head. I was having an exchange with Jane Wood of the Chili Hollow Jane Wood Needlepoint Extravaganza website, which everyone should have on their news feed because it's chock full of stuff. But you came up, don't ask me why, how, or whatever, because I have no idea.
I hope it was all right.
Well, no, it was all very positive. Trust me. But she said about your designs, and this is stuck with me, not just for you, but for others. She said to me that Gayan's designs are not difficult to stitch, are not difficult in terms of the actual what you have to do, but you have to have the technique right. You have to have good technique to execute them. And the only one that I finished of yours, though I own 2 or 3, the only one I finished is your Lady Edith one from the Downton Abbey series.
Right.
And I will say, I'm very pleased with the result, but I will say that rang true when I stitched that statement that technically you have to have good technique, because I struggled in the middle multiple times. And it was bad technique that was preventing me from having the clean lines that you had designed.
I do like a clean line.
Yeah.
I do.
And so once I got that, and once I realized what I was fighting, which was me, then it went faster and better, and I started to get the result I wanted. But boy, I had to stay on top of that technique all the time, or it really started to muddle. At least in my eye, it just started to muddle, and it wasn't what you had designed. And so that that just sticks with me all the time. And I apply that.
It's true. I mean, thank you. I do think it is true. I do like a clean line. I think there's some things you can do that will help you get to a point where you improve in technique. The first one is having a doodle canvas, or linen if you use linen. Keeping it on the side. I usually send them with big designs, a 6x8 piece of fabric. Put it on stretcher bars if you're working on stretcher bars. And before you start, warm up. If it's an important piece to you, that it look good, take 2 or 3 or 4 stitches to warm up, like an athlete warms up or a singer arms up. And you just stitch these things until okay, now I'm ready to go. Then move to your canvas and execute it. Try and finish an area, try and stitch an area without breaking, because then your tension changes. I use one of my best tips came from doing so much cut work. When you end off a thread in the back, do you realize that if you end off with a tapestry needle that you're stitching with, you can often disturb the stitches in the front? Keep a sharp needle, an embroidery needle, and end your threads with an embroidery needle. Don't end conversely, if you start a thread, start with a waist knot that's in the channel, correct? Mm-hmm. When you end, carry a waist knot thread forward, and the next time stitch over it so that you're not disturbing your stitches. Things like that really make a difference. Watch the direction and the pull of the stitch and mirror it every time you need to. Don't switch direct. So look at your back. The back should be consistent. So that if you've got a slant, if you're doing a Gobelin stitch, up at 1, down at 2, straight Gobelin stitch, right? Mm-hmm. You up at 1, down at 2, up at 3, down at 4. Between 2 and 3, there's a pull on the stitch in a certain direction, correct? Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry about that. Make sure that pull is always the same. So that if it's from lower left to upper right on the back, it should always be from lower left to upper right. When you change thread, people will make it go from upper left to lower right. And then if you look carefully at the front of it, the pull in the hole, the pull of the thread in the hole is sometimes, well, if you're me, I use thin thread. So you always see that. I pay attention to stuff like that. I try to teach people to. And there's just simple little things like that. I mean, we could go on and on about it.
Well, but see, that's, to me, that's what interests me, is those little things, because when you change thread, and I always try to be conscious of that when I change thread, number one, to complete a stitch or whatever before I change thread, but also those little things, and now you really have me thinking, to make sure that you bring the new thread and continue to go in the same direction.
And I watch this and I see it in people's, all right, I'm stitching along, up at 1, down 2, up 3, down 4, up at 12, down at 13, up at 20, down at 24, and I'm ready to change threads, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, when I change threads, the way you're taught in the beginning needlepoint class, you feed the thread, to end off the thread, you feed it back through the part you just stitched, right?
Right.
Okay, then you start with a waist knot in the channel, or away waist knot, and you now begin the rhythm of the stitch again. If you have carried that ending thread from your last row back through the stitch and not forward, see the direction pull through the hole on the stitches, you're going to notice it. So you always want to carry, if you're going up a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth, you want, even though you're out of thread, you want to carry the thread forward, so that and then you bring the new thread in from behind, so that pull at 25, 26, 27, 28 remains the same. That's really important when you're doing, or say, a satin stitch or a Gobelin stitch or a slanted Gobelin stitch or any of those that have a smooth satiny look. You don't want to be able to see where the stitcher changed threads, and that's how you do it. I'm not sure I described that well, but whatever.
No, I see it. See, and now I'm thinking, I gotta change my ways here. Yeah.
And you notice it, Bonnie. I understand you notice it. I notice it really a lot in cross stitch, particularly a cross stitcher's cross stitch over 2 threads, meshes, I call them. You know, if you change the direction of making that stitch, then you'll notice the pull on the cross somewhat. I mean, I use that to my advantage. I made a face one time, and I wanted a tall, it was just I cross stitch over 2 meshes, in both. I went over 1 and up 2, over back 1 and up 2 more. and I wanted a thin, tall cross stitch. Sometimes I want them fat and wide, so I manipulate them. Particularly on small faces, it's a good thing to know. But when you've got a whole sea of cross stitches, you want them to be very uniform in presentation so that they look done with care. On the other hand, I think there's a big argument for having things look handmade. If they get too machine-like, then it doesn't help the piece either. So there's always a balance in there.
No, everything that I've read and the proper stitch, Gary, you don't have that book, but Darlene will.
No, I don't.
She did beautiful samplers. I love her samplers.
Yeah, and she speaks exactly what you're talking about. And, Gary and I have been big proponents of the pin stitch, starting and ending with the pin stitch, which is not doing what you're saying to do. And I have noticed, and I think, Gary, you have too, because we kind of talked about this in our last video of the Queen, is that I have really become almost enamored with away knots. And I never knew the difference between an away knot and a waist knot until I started this Queen sampler. And since then, I've been very big. I really have seen the value in them. But I agree that you can see a difference when you pull it underneath, when you're ending off. You can see it pull the threads.
You have to be really careful. The other thing I like about I leave long. If I'm going to do something difficult, I'm not sure I'm going to like what I'm doing, I begin with an away waist knot that is really far away. And I don't end it off, because after I get the row finished, say I get the next row finished, and I go back and think, I don't think my beginning was what I want it to be, because I still have that knot unfinished. I can cut it off, and I still can unpick it from the beginning to make it work. I mean, I like doing that, and then I pull it the opposite direction so that whatever comes near it catches it. And for me personally, because I don't know where I'm, I start with a blank canvas and I don't always know where I'm going. I like to begin and end threads as much as I can under their space. If I'm doing it back to acid green, which I happen to like, if I'm doing an area in acid green, I want ultimately to end my thread and begin my thread through that green, so that if I ever have to unpick it, I'm not tangled up with everything around it. I don't know if I'm clear. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
How do you?
Fight somewhat what I just said, but for me, it's important.
So you also want to end. What you're saying is you also want to end your threads under the same color that you started with.
Now that's at war with what I just said to some extent. But if I'm not certain of something, I always begin and end them. I always begin with waist knots, long waist knots somewhere. And then when it comes time to park them, I park them through their color, through what I did with that thread in that color. Then if I go, say I've been using acid green and I decided it should be pumpkin orange instead of acid green, I can unpick that. Can you tell it's getting Halloweeny around here? When I need to unpick the acid green to change it to the pumpkin orange, I know it's not tangled up with the white and the black and the brown and whatever that are all around it. It's isolated in there, like I'm picking out really carefully. And cleanly. I think clean is the name of the game. I think a clean line, clean stitches that are uniform in shape and size and presentation, all of that. Gary, I think that's what makes for good technique.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're just purely on the technical part of it.
Well, and that's what, that's what I wanted your thoughts on, because when I had that conversation with Jane, I was thinking, all right, technique, you have to have good technique. And the first and obvious is tension. Obviously, you want your tension consistent across the board, however you stitch, tight, loose, whatever. But then what else is it that makes good technique?
I think just the overall, I think it's wrapped up in my mind. It always has been with the whole piece, the presentation of the whole piece. And I can think of I told this on my website, I think, but I'm going to tell this story now. I learned how to do double running stitch, which I love doing. It's fairly late in my stitching life. I'd been doing, and Betty Chen Louie, who I mentioned before, taught me how to do it. And she was rigorous about making it reversible. And I was rigorous about making it reversible in the beginning in honor to her. And then I got off of making wrought iron. And I made a lot of, on the sampler of mine, my acorn sampler, that was the first piece that I made with a lot of double running. And I did a traditional acorn pattern that was originally over 3, over 3, under 3, over 3, under 3. And I reduced it, as people do now because the scrim isn't so fine, over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2. And I made it totally reversible. And it was either a straight, across, a horizontal, a vertical, or a true diagonal stitch. Then I got interested in making all kinds of wrought iron. Well, that meant that you couldn't follow the rules. Mm-hmm. Of double running reversible, because there were times I thought the first responsibility of my stitching is to make it look like the thing I'm making, so that if I could break the rules of double running stitch and I could make it look like better wrought iron, I would break the rule in a heartbeat to get the better wrought iron. So I was somewhere up in Seattle teaching one time, one of my early efforts at making wrought iron. And the student stood up in class and she said, "It is terrible what you have done to this beautiful art form." She said, "You have just ruined it. There are 100 needlework teachers rolling over in their graves for what you have done to distort this." And I thought, she felt really passionately about it. And so I thought, what do I say now? So I said, "Don't I get any points for the fact that it really looks like wrought iron?" So that's my prejudice, and I always wonder. I know there are people who stitch my things and want to enter them in shows, and I think, when I break rules when I'm stitching things, I always think, oh no, I wonder do I have to explain why I did this? And then I think, nope, it's up to them.
Yep.
But I always think that technique plays a second fiddle to what the design wants you to do. And the best of all technique and the best of all stitching is when it services the design in you. That just looks awesome. The whole presentation is just awesome.
So if all right, let's take this at another angle then. If I'm starting out stitching and I'm just learning, how do I? Yeah. And I'm one of those people who wants to progress. And I want to, I have this lofty goal of becoming an advanced stitcher. How do where does that happen? As a beginner, I learned to thread a needle, I learned to anchor a thread, follow a pattern, so on and so forth. What is the progression that gets me to whatever is defined as an advanced stitcher?
I think you and I discussed this before, but we'll discuss it again. I had rules I wrote for beginning, intermediate, advanced. Yes. All right. I have a preface to this. If you were in my hands and I was wanting to teach you how to stitch, I would teach you in an unconventional way. I would say basically there are 2 stitches in needlework. On account of ground. One of them is a straight stitch and the other is a diagonal stitch. And I would teach you those 2 things. So I would say, all right, you can do a straight stitch over 2 meshes, over 3 meshes, over 4 meshes, over 5 meshes, over whatever you want. Go play. Now, diagonal stitches, you can go on the diagonal, off the diagonal. You can make it long, short, whatever you want. But basically, if you look at most needlework stitches, there's some tied ones and things like that, but in the beginner's mind, they're 2. Then you experiment with those. See what it takes you. Draw a 6-year-old's drawing of a flower and figure out how you would make it. I wouldn't let you have a design from somebody else for the first several weeks. I would make you just fiddle on a doodle. Make something. Make whatever you want. You can go trace it. You can find it online. You can find it in a book. You can do whatever you want. Put it on a pencil, on a canvas, and see if you can make it. I'm teaching you to do this and this. The rest doesn't matter for now. That's how I would begin. That said, I have unconventional rules for beginning, intermediate, advanced, and teacher. And I used to have to subscribe to this because A&G has rules. If you've taken this many classes, you know how to do this many techniques, you are a beginner. If you've taken more classes and you know how many more techniques you can do, you get to be intermediate. The advanced person knows how to do all these techniques, has taken all these classes and so forth. And I'm not sure I don't remember what the definition of teacher was. But I rewrote it because it was the only way I could salve my conscience. I always had people who were much better at this than I was. I just invented the project. That was the only reason I was teacher. But what I found out early in the game is this. When you're a beginner, you learn you have a nice little sign, and it's really pretty, and you're sitting in a store, and somebody shows you what to do, and you stitch up at 1, down at 2, up at 3, down at 4, up at 25, down at 26, up at 30, down at 31, and so forth. All right, whatever. And then you discover you made a mistake, and you go, oh no, what do I do now? And dutifully, they tell you, rip it out and do it right, because it never will seem right to you unless you do that. So you are always conscientious in your beginning stages. They don't give you something too hard. They give you something easy, and you are going to make it perfect. What they haven't learned yet is that nothing's ever perfect, but that's a whole other thing. All right, at some point you have been stitching, you really like to stitch, you've made a small mistake, and your little beady eyes look to the right and look to the left, and nobody really recognizes that you've made this mistake. And you stop and you think, what could I do right now that would allow me to keep that mistake? That is the instant you step into intermediate. You have begun taking control. You see, it sounds funny, but you've begun taking control of what you're making. Now you're going along. You're pretty used to small mistakes and incorporating them in something that you do, and then you make the colossal big mistake. It is huge. And you think, well, it means what do I do? I've got to rip out a quarter to half of what I've done. Do I do it? Well, the intermediate in you probably would rip it out, but there'll come a time when you say, you take a deep breath, you stand back from it, you look at it and say, it's not what I intended, but if I did A and B and C and D to it, it would be presentable. In fact, it might even have some advantages to the way it looks. That's the point at which you step into advanced. You see the control you've taken over your design. And maybe you'll say, I got it finished. I got this block of things done. I never liked it anyway. I didn't like the stitch, didn't like the color, didn't like the thread. So maybe now I can try something that I would like to do. And you just rip it out and stitch it over again, incorporate it into another part of it. That's my definition of advanced stitcher. So you see what we talk about design and technique as if it's a dichotomy. It's not. It is all one because they run together. My husband always jokes about he's mind body, you refer to things as mind body, and he said gay. My husband's an academic. He says, Gayan, that's such a Western dichotomy. Mind and body are all one. He said that to me forever. I think that about needlework. I think it's all one. It all goes together. You didn't do the design, but you chose the design. And it's what you make of it. And so it all goes together. Me as teacher, the only thing that ever qualified me as teacher is if you did something that was just horrible, like you cut the meshes or bled all over your canvas or did the stitch backwards when it wouldn't work, I could usually figure out a way to fix it. So that it came down to this. One year at Callaway, somebody's cat with a black dirty paw jumped on a design of mine right in front of the face with no stitching on the background. And she said, I don't know what to do. I've got all this work in it. I said, well, okay, let's see what we can figure out. And we ended up taking toothpaste and a toothbrush and scrubbing the dark spot, and it came out. That's my sole qualification for the years I taught. Now I don't teach anymore. I just sit and stitch.
Yeah.
And notice I believe that heartily as somebody who I believe there are guidelines according to your eye that you want to preserve, so that when you say my work is clean line, it is fairly clean line. When I look at today's needlework, which is the direct opposite to what I do, it tends to be crowded, so that I sometimes look at some of the worst of it, and I think, I hear this little voice in my head going, help, help. And it's the design, let me out of here. Give me back my space. And I think so that if you have a choice of just piling on every thread and every stitch and every piece of beadwork you can find, somewhere there's got to be a resting place. And that you find in those videos on basic design. You can't just crowd everything in there. Anyway,
amen. Can I just say amen to this? Because that can be said across every form of needlework, and including finishing, that there's purity. And I think that, you know, like what you said, that is the main thing in today's needlework, in my opinion, that is lacking, is that we're trying to just like throw it on there. Just throw it on there, boys, and do it. That makes it better. And no, that doesn't make it better. That just makes it like what you said, crowded, and the design, you know, although it might
you
have
lose
all this
the design.
Yes, you do. Absolutely.
You lose. I have a general rule of thumb that I started. It was the only thing I've ever written on my website that went, you know, for me, viral. I said, you know, there's a way of looking at this. There are basically three things to a needlework project. There's line, there's color, and there's texture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pick two.
Yes. And this show has nothing to do with me, but I get emailed I get emailed all the time about, okay, I've watched your tutorial on how to do this, and I have this design, and here it is started, and I need these colors, and I've chosen these colors from the design, and there might be like 4 or 5, and I just can't get this piece to pop. I just can't get it to pop. What is it? Can you help me? Well, first of all, it's what Gary said earlier about taking photos, is that when you're wanting a piece to pop, you don't want the stitching, here it is in the middle, and then all of this linen or canvas or whatever around it. You want to crop it so that it pops. That's the first thing to think about. And then the other thing is 4 or 5 colors. What? You don't want 4 or 5 colors. And I said this just the other day to this lady that emailed me. She had this whole palette of colors that she wanted to incorporate into this finish. And I said, well, first of all, the reason why it's not popping is that you made the ornament too big. You need to cut it down. And the second is 5 colors. No, pick 2 that you want to enhance that picture. I would choose red and green if it was me, but it can be brown and gold or whatever. And use that, and you lay those 2 together with that ornament, and I'm going to tell you right now, it is going to be immediately pop, because what you're doing is just you're I always call it like your eye strays. You're not focusing. All this busyness on the outside strays your eyesight, and you want it focused in like the laser beam on what you want to show off. And what do you want to show off? You want your handwork to show off, and it's not going to if it's too busy, because it just distracts the eye.
There is a tendency in this, so that when I say there's line, color, and texture, if you have a lot of color and a lot of texture, you want to keep the line very simple. Yeah. I mean, this is just a rule of thumb. If you've got a busy line and a lot of color, keep the texture somewhat. You don't have to make it just all basket weave, but just make it so that it's not so full of goopy big stitches. On the project that I love, that I just finished, I had background problems. Background is a pet peeve of mine, because today the background is sometimes the biggest space. Therefore, you can do the most intricate, large-scale stitch there, so that when you're finished, all you see is the background. Background's supposed to recede. So I have this enormously busy, gooped-up design, and I needed a background that was so simple it didn't conflict with the rest of the piece. So I did a stitch I absolutely pattern I absolutely loved. I basket weaved the whole thing first. Then I went back over it with a space sort of brick stitch. You know, it's spaced so that up at 1, down at 2 over 2 meshes, skipped 3 threads, up at 1, up at 3, down at 4, and then came back with opposing one so that it was in the middle of the 3 threads. 4 threads must have been. It's even count. So it's a little tiny boring stitch, but it allows my piece to shine.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I had taken, and then I have all these beads on it. I mean, I put the world's beads on it. When you put the world's beads on it, you have to keep the stitching. So if you put a great big gobby, this is what I see, stitch with 3 different colors, chronic braid, silk, and something else in this stitch with a lot of contrast, and then you put beads on the top of it, you got a goopy mess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you have to keep all that. You have to look at. That's back to the very beginning of this. Don't you think that's what's important? Spend some time thinking about what you're going to do and say, what is it I want to see? Well, in this case, I mean, I'll say that the piece I did is a figure. And so she has a face, and the face is the single, in any figure, the face is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you start obscuring the face, you've lost the focal point. So you have to have it work for her to enhance her.
Right.
And you have to think about that. You just can't be mindless about it.
Exactly. And that's what, I mean, and it's like what you're saying. I mean, it is design. That's exactly what it is. And when I finish, that's the first thing I do is I don't just like dive in and start cutting. You know what I mean? That's what I think that's what, I sit and I look at it and I think what would best suit this, what shape, what, line, I always feel like I'm one of the cleanest finishers that I know. And that's because I don't just dive in. And that's the single most, I feel like, mistake that people make is that they don't like to finish. And so what are they going to do? Well, they're just going to hurry up and get in there and get it done and just cut and then what do you got? You got a big goopy mess. You know what I mean? And
usually in today's world, it's a big goopy mess all the way around. Clean it up.
Yeah. Yeah. I
agree. The best thing, Bonnie, you should tell them, we should go get a series of YouTubes. I'm sure they're basic design lessons that teach you about the importance of finding a focal point and what to do with the secondary and tertiary parts of it.
Mm-hmm. I am a scientist. I have not had any kind of training or anything like that at all. It's just, I know what I like. I know what my eye likes. And then, to hear you talk, I mean, it's like, wow, maybe I am better than, and I don't mean that like that, but I mean, I do think about every one of those elements that you've spoken about here today. I think about that when I stitch and when I for sure when I finish. And it's just more pleasing to the eye. Simple is better. It doesn't have to be, it can be very intricate stitches, but just a very simple color palette or a very, very simple stitch with a very intricate color palette, but it's all works because it's simple. You know what I mean? It's not like over the top.
I always think of it as looking at it and seeing the harmony in it.
Mm-hmm.
So that if it all fits together, I don't know, somebody asked me for advice one time and she'd stitched a piece and it was a pleasing design. She had a center motif, so she had a background and she had a border around it. And she asked me, and I said, each one of them is really a nice element. There's a problem with it. They don't go together. They don't enhance one another. So that you pick out the one that's the most important, which in this case, since it was the center motif. Make that. Now look for something that brings that more to life. Don't just say, oh, I like this stitch, so I'm going to use it. And then in the border, so she's got this that's where I was thinking about the line was really curving. And then she gets this hard, angular, large border. And it draws, each element drew away from the other 3. They were all wonderful elements. They just shouldn't have been together. Proportion, line, the way it worked, all that. See, I think I'm also somebody who thinks that we are people, and part of being a human being is looking at things visually. We all can learn. We just have to try a bit of it. Mm-hmm. And the first place to start is doing just about what you say. Take a look at it and figure, what can I do that will enhance this more?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just picking up a painted canvas and a stitch guide and starting to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know. I have another. Gary, do I have time to tell another little story? That's a favorite story of mine. I had somebody write me, and this is all my travel teaching days. I live in my own little world now. I love my world. It's mine. I'm queen of it. And somebody wrote to me and said, does this Kreinik braid go with this silk? And I said, I don't know. Try it. And I said, beats me. Try it and see what it looks like. She wrote me back, and she said to me, you're the teacher. You're supposed to know those things.
Oh. And
I said, I can't know. So she pressed me. Then this started happening to me in class. And finally I said, if the immortal artists of the Western world didn't know, without trying, how would one mere mortal needlework teacher? So I stood by that. I thought that was a really good line for a long time.
Well, I think that's true.
That's what's on your business card, right? Mere mortal needlework teacher. Yeah.
So then the person one time, so I got this smart aleck person in my class who thought she knew everything one time, and I used my standard line, which was this. And she put her hands on her hips, and she said to me, how do you know that? And, I thought, lady, you got to go find out for yourself. I said, game's over, okay, and stopped using the line. Because I thought, if you're going to pursue something visual, study a little bit about it. How the really wonderful, if you have a favorite, I have a favorite artist, Cezanne. I look at his stuff all the time. He sits on my shoulder. Doesn't look like it from what I do, but he does. So I look at what he does. I look at what it says to me. I incorporate it in all sorts of small ways. I try to incorporate it into what I do. I know he experimented. They all experimented. Learn that. Mm-hmm. Go look at some things that, go someplace and look at some visual things and say, why am I attracted to this? Because it will help you decide what to do with your needlework. Am I answering your question, Gary? That's the only way I know to answer it. It's all one. It's like mind, body, Jim says to me. Mind, body, one thing. And I think that this is all united. The really brilliant technician also pays attention to design. I think that's the first rule. The brilliant designer, if she's really a brilliant designer, she's not sloppy about her technique because it draws away from what she's presenting.
Exactly. And I think I've said this before, and people think I'm being a smart aleck, and I'm not being a smart aleck. But I always say, look outside your window. And what colors do you see? Because God is the master artist, and he made magenta sunsets, and he made orange dawns, and he made gray and violent storms, but he didn't put them all together on the same day. He gave each one their certain time of the day or their certain time of the year.
And then add to what you say. Then find something. If you like those magenta sunsets, go look and see how somebody really capable handles that in a two-dimensional setting, a painter. Mm-hmm. What do they do with it? I have another favorite that I would just everybody start with, which is plein air painters, the Impressionists, California plein air paintings, which paint purple into the mountains, real purple. They use colors that make you go, oh, I wish I'd seen that in that. I looked at that, and it just made it that much better. Mm-hmm. And then incorporate, I don't know, I think you have to spend some time thinking about it. I think, Gary, you said that in the beginning. And, I think that's what you have to do.
Okay. All right. Left turn. It's Friday the 13th when we're recording this.
Yeah, it's a bad day.
Yeah. So in honor of that, we've put together, actually Gay Ann did, a list of needlework superstitions. Mm-hmm. Some of these are wild.
Some of them are, my favorite one is the Winchester house. That's my favorite one. That I think her name was Sarah Winchester, believed that as long as she kept building her house, she wouldn't die. Mm-hmm. And so she built onto it. And I didn't look this up, and I meant to before I gave it. That's 100 and some rooms on it, I think. And I don't know ultimately what happened to her, but I thought this applies to stitchery. Never be without something to stitch. If before you finish one project, get 3 more going so that you never finish. That's a big superstition of mine.
I thought that it would be, just keep on buying stuff.
Well, you can do that too, but start it. So It is a sickness. This hobby of ours is. I think, and it's Friday the 13th, and I'm horribly superstitious, and I don't know if I'm just, I wish I weren't.
Well, my favorite in this list, never sew on Sunday because you will have to rip out all those stitches when you get to heaven. Whoa.
Those are wonderful old superstitions.
Yeah.
Picking up needles, retrieving things, never sewing clothes on somebody, all that.
Yeah.
They were wonderful.
The one, what is it? Never give away scissors. You always sell them.
It cuts up your friendship.
Yeah, it'll cut up your friendship. And I mentioned that to Marga, my wife, about that. Well, that's really weird. And she said actually that she had learned that when it came to knives, and that she had actually seen her dad give someone a knife and require them to give a penny to him for that very reason. That he would
well,
only,
they're kind of the same.
Yeah, he would only sell you the knife a penny, but because it would cut up your friendship. Yeah.
I think there are so many of those wonderful old superstitions, and they're all true today. I thought of another one of my own that came from a black cat. I said, never reach over black thread to retrieve a thread. You'll mess it up. Move the black thread to the side and then take the pink from the stack in front of it.
Whoa. Okay.
I don't know it. That's stupid. I don't do that. But
you are
superstitious. I thought of it. No, I don't do that. But I thought of it. I'm superstitious about the 13th, Friday the 13th. And then I have a friend who's from Chile, and down there it's not Friday the 13th. It's Tuesday the 13th. Go figure.
Oh, that's their day of bad luck.
Right. That's their day of bad luck. And I was born on the 13th, so I turned 21 on Friday the 13th and thought I was doomed forever.
Oh, that's the stars coming together. Turn 21 on the 13th. Oh man,
Friday the 13th.
Yeah, no wonder. All right, you're entitled to be superstitious. We just you're full entitlement there. Yeah. Oh man, don't go drinking that night.
Really. So, did anybody have any other observations?
Well, I just like some of these. Some of these are kind of violent, like prick fingers while hand sewing. You'll always wipe a drop of blood on the inside seam and make a wish of good fortune for the show and the performer who will wear the costume. And if you
if you prick your finger on a canvas, do you know how to get the blood out?
No.
Lick.
Pile the canvas in your mouth and suck hard.
I was going to say suck it because
your own saliva removes it.
Yeah, your own saliva removes your own blood.
Right.
It won't remove other people's blood, but it will remove your own.
No, but it will be your own. So there you are licking on a canvas to see if you can get the blood out. You could also just put some red thread in there too. Creative.
Well, I did not know this. So if I get blood on the canvas, my saliva will remove it.
It should. Better
on your shirt And the other thing is peroxide removes all blood.
Oh, that's good to know. That's not so glamorous as removing it with your own saliva, is it? But it probably works
somebody else. The only reason I know it is because I'm a medical technologist and I worked in a laboratory for 25 years, and you get blood on you, and so.
That's probably a better thing to do, unless it's not white canvas. If it's not white canvas, then what happens?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, peroxide removes all blood.
And on old superstitions being violent, just think about fairy tales. They're so violent.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we water them down for little kiddies, and they really aren't little kiddie stories, are they?
Yeah, I never did it, but if you go and read the Grimm tales, the originals, I guess they're really quite violent. Yes, I haven't. I prefer the childhood version where everybody's happy.
Right.
Yeah, me too. I don't want my mind polluted with that.
With unhappiness.
Yeah.
Well, today's the day to get it all out of your system. Just totally finished.
Now, what was this? In Scotland, it was once believed that a witch could conjure a strong wind by dipping a cloth in water and whacking it against a stone 3 times. Now, that's the alcohol talking there, I think.
And just think, I always think when I think of witches, I always think of Macbeth. You can't help but think about that. And I think witches can do everything. Plus that, I bought myself a Christmas present last year. I bought it 3 days before Christmas. I had a thimble. One of the most collectible American thimbles is the Salem witch thimble. And I went online looking in eBay, and I found the box to the original thimble. No thimble in it, but the box. I already had the thimble. And, I knew it was because of the name Daniel Lowe. That was who had the witch thimbles made in 1892 to commemorate the Salem witch trials. I bought that box. It should have cost me $8 for a little cardboard box with the name Daniel Lowe on the top of it. Unfortunately, the guy knew what he had. So I said, "Can you give me another one?" He said, "No, you've got one." He's a Salem witch nut. I mean, that's what he collects. He said, "You've got one, I've got one. There aren't any other ones." I said, "Well, if you find another one, I got a second thimble that needs the box now, too." He said, "It's not going to happen." But I thought, somebody should do something with the Salem witches. I like the whole, it's Halloween. You know what? It's September. It's almost halfway through September, right? So It's getting to be Halloween season. So there are witches and all that coming up.
Yeah, it's not a holiday. Yeah.
You don't? Are you not a Halloween person?
No, couldn't care less, actually.
Yeah, I'm not either.
No.
Not you either?
No.
What about all that?
Yeah.
No, you don't have sweet teeth, right? Either one of you?
No, I do have sweet teeth. I have a sweet tooth, of course. But
I got a mouthful of them, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what it is. I liked it when I was a little kid. It has nothing to do with religion or anything like that. It's just like, it's not one of my favorite times of the year.
Yeah, don't care. Don't care.
I love Halloween. I absolutely love Halloween. And I always thought it was I had such a sweet tooth, all that candy floating around. But I like all the excuses to use those colors, and I like jack-o'-lanterns, and I like all the decorations.
Now see the fall colors. Those appeal to me to no end.
Yeah, me too.
Really?
Yeah. But the Halloween thing with the witches and the jack-o'-lanterns and all that stuff, couldn't care less. Just don't care.
Me too.
What about Day of the Dead? I wonder, is Day of the Dead big across the country, or is it just here in California?
I think it's had a recent rise in popularity, like with the sugar skulls and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, none of that appeals to me. No.
We're so close to Mexico. It's a big deal for us. It's like eating, we don't eat ketchup anymore. We just eat salsa, and we have burritos. This is a national dish. So I don't know.
No, we see here in the Midwest, we see a lot of that. I mean, that's the whole, what the stores call it, the decorating season.
Right.
Labor Day starts the decorating season, and they've made Halloween into, really, in terms of decorations, the equivalent of Christmas.
Right.
In some ways, I think Halloween is getting bigger than Christmas decorations, because although it obviously originates from religious stuff, it doesn't have the religious connotation of Christmas.
Right.
And who aren't Christian.
And there's a house in our neighborhood that the weekend of Labor Day, that's when that's their haunted house.
They start haunted house?
Yes, they decorate. Well, they don't start a haunted house, but they have that smoke, and the fog at night, and when you walk by, there's like the only reason I know this is that I walk every day, and I set it off in the night. But it's like a motion detector, and there's this thing that pops out, a skeleton that pops out, and it's like, that freaky music and stuff. And they have it's like all out. Full on haunted house.
Do you know
and they start decorating.
I remember from Halloween when I was a little girl, we went to a party, and there was a black room, and you went in and you felt things. You couldn't see them, you felt them. And they had skinned grapes as eyeballs, and I never thought that.
We did the same thing for 4-H, like a spaghetti, put your hands in, and this was like somebody's guts, or and then peeled, that was eyeballs. I did that same thing in 4-H for I think it was a Halloween thing that they did during 4-H when I was probably like 8 years old, and I still
Right,
to this
that's
day
what I
remember
think.
that.
I remembered it too. For that same, I remember the skinned eyeballs.
Yeah.
But do you know why I think the Stitching World likes Halloween so much?
Why?
It's there because the Stitching World does not use a lot of orange, and it's an excuse to use orange.
Yeah.
You get your orange out of your system.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there anything else, Gary, that you want to ask me?
No, I think we can stop now if you'd like.
Okay. We can keep going if you want. We can get another thing going. We can go another hour.
Well, when you have your sale and your new designs, then you come back and then we'll do the rest of it.
Do you know when I really want to do it? When I do this one I love. But
Okay.
She's not for a couple of years.
Couple of years.
Okay.
I'm not waiting 2 more years to talk to you. No, that's not happening.
We're going to run out of things here.
No, that's not happening. No. When you have your sale, then we'll have another conversation. I'm not waiting 2 years to talk to you. Waited a year to do this one. That's enough.
Well, it's fun as usual.
Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks, Gan.